Okay, so my first disclaimer is I am not an attorney. You should always seek legal advice and legal counsel for legal issues. This is the reason why most companies will not disclose that you were fired and why you can sue them if they do disclose that you were fired. And I'm also going to give you some insight into how employment verification works, okay? So number one, employers cannot or are advised from an HR and a legal perspective not to provide information specific to termination of an employee because employers don't decide if your termination was legitimate or not. So an employer, most states are at-will states. Some states vary, but all in all, a company can let you go for whatever reason that they want to. They can say your shirt is green and we want you to wear a black shirt today, so you're fired. That doesn't mean there won't be consequences. That just means that as a business owner, I have the right to decide who I want to work at my company for when and why, unless there is some type of contract in place that nullifies my decision or my ability to decide, who works here. So when someone is asking if an employee was fired, and if I say, hey, I fired this person or this person was fired because they violated XYZ policy, you are running the course of you're running into the opportunity for a defamation lawsuit. And the reason why that is because no one has validated your reason for firing this person. There's something called wrongful termination. Okay, hundreds of thousands of people win wrongful termination suits in court every year, where that employer then has to pay them for wrongful termination. In addition to that, unemployment claims. Hundreds of thousands of people win unemployment claims every year, and employers have to pay them for wrongful termination. So if a court or a judge or a governing body has not determined that your reason for termination was valid, factual, and true, and an employer then goes and tells another potential employer that you were fired or gives you a bad review, and that costs you an opportunity or a job or some type of financial compensation, you can sue that person for defamation. So because of this, most established companies stray away from verifying information such as reason for termination. Now, employment verification is completely different from a reference check. Most companies have switched over to third-party platforms, and they are using third parties to verify employment. Most companies who have to verify employment are transferring these requests to human resource professionals or some type of human resource department, the Experian work number, or other sources that will provide minimal information needed to verify that you work here in order for, from a legal standpoint, to protect them from costly defamation lawsuits and the time and hassle associated with a costly defamation lawsuit. So you have to think, would a company want to invest thousands of dollars and a lot of time defending a defamation suit when they can simply say, this person worked here from this date to this date, this was their title, they may give insight into your responsibilities, they may give insight into your pay. Now, there are some companies who act unscrupulously. So maybe you work at a corner store that's owned by a mom and pop's person, and they're so mad that you quit, or they're so mad that you were fired. And when you go and verify that employment, they may try to slander you or defame you. So then the next question becomes, well, how can I prove that? Simple. If an opportunity is taken away from you, you have the right to get access to your background and employment verification record. Now, the extent of that access varies from state to state, so you can ask for it. If that company does not want to give it to you, or they don't want to disclose why you were rejected this opportunity. Now, remember, background checks happen after a conditional offer has been given, so the employer would then have to rescind an offer, take it back. They would then have to justify why they've done that. If they don't want to give that information to you and you want to take it to court, you could subpoena that information. Now, if you want to determine, well, how can I decide if it's worth that? Have someone call your employer and act like your previous employer and act like they're verifying something. Act like they're verifying you for a new position or opportunity. See what they have to say about you. If you hear that they've defamed you or they've slandered you or they've given a negative review, then you will know, hey, this may be worth investigating and taking it to court. Now, verification, employment verification is to verify that you work there. It's to verify that you didn't lie on your application. That's what employment verification is for. A reference check is to get information about your character. That is where I would ask questions about you, where someone could say something that could potentially be negative. So you have the choice of who you put for your reference check. Now, another thing that we need to talk about is you have the option to say, hey, I do not want you to contact this employer for a reference check, or I don't want you to contact this employer to verify this employment. If you know you've been fired, you have that right. Let me tell you something. As a recruiter, I'm not, and this is from a hiring manager, recruiting, and HR manager perspective, okay? I'm not looking at your application. I look at your application when I'm forwarding it to whomever is responsible for verifying what you put on there. I'm making my decision to have a conversation with you based off of your resume because that's what I'm looking at. So if you select do not contact this employer, I'm not going to contact them. But then you will have to provide tax documents, pay stubs, and an offer letter, or a combination, or, depending on that company's process or policy, to verify that employment. You do not have to let an employer contact a previous company that you've been fired from for a reference check. You don't have to do that. You can simply provide them with information that tax statements, pay stubs, an offer letter, information that authenticates the dates that you worked there, the title that you had. So that's the key insight there. Now, again, you have the opportunity in these situations to protect yourself in many different ways. You also know the company that you work for. Is it a small company? Do they have an HR department? Do they typically tend to follow what is legal, what is right, and what is just? Have you seen them throw somebody under the bus? Then I've given you other information to consider as well. Do what you will with this information. My point in my video is that you don't have to tell a company you were fired. So let's say you were terminated because you violated a material policy. And they ask why you left that company. You don't have to say I was fired. You can simply say, I'm seeking an opportunity that provides more autonomy. I want to work in an environment that encourages creativity that will enable me the opportunity to use my professional judgment when making decisions on behalf of consumers. At my previous employer, this opportunity wasn't afforded to me, and getting this type of experience is critical to my long-term career goals. So I'm seeking other opportunities that will provide me those opportunities so that I can qualify for my dream job later. It's that simple. You never said you were fired. You never said you weren't. So you didn't lie. And then you have to think of this. 9 times out of 10, will they ask you where you fired? I've never been to an interview where an employer asked me, have you ever been fired? Another thing I want to point out is if that question is on an application, please pay attention to the fact that it is 99% of the time voluntary, meaning there's no asterisk by it. If you skip it, you're fine. You don't have to say you were fired.